Because the transplanted brain had no power of expression, he could not prove if it had retained the power of thought. White seemed to have reached an impasse. But his work had not gone unnoticed on the other side of the Iron Curtain. Soviet scientists were still deeply interested in brain research.
Russian delegations would come to Cleveland, would spend time in my laboratories. And it was on the basis of their visits and friendships I developed at that time that I took the opportunity to travel to the Soviet Union and to visit these men in their laboratories and their operating rooms. And I came away in all these cases with great respect for their accomplishments and for their abilities as researchers and as physicians.
White's first trip was in 1966. Others followed. His friend and fellow researcher Harold Hillman often went with him.
During the Cold War, science and medicine in the Soviet Union were complete mystery to people in the West. Therefore, there was a feeling that there was a sort of mine of important discoveries which they made in this area which we should know about. We found they were rather frightened to tell us what they did, because what they did in the research institute was considered state secrets. So although we had very nice dinners with them, they used to fill us up with vodka and pretty girls, they didn't actually tell us what they were doing. And both Dr. White and myself noticed this.
One person they were particularly keen to meet was the man whose experiments had inspired White years before, Vladimir Demikov. Since his two-headed dog experiment, Demikov had gone on successfully to transplant more vital organs from one dog to another. He'd even developed new heart surgery techniques. But by 1966, he'd fallen foul of the authorities and his colleagues, who thought his work outlandish. Demikov was dismissed from his laboratory, and when they threatened to evict him from his flat, he considered suicide.
It was very tough for him. He was getting desperate, both at home and at work. He couldn't provide accommodation for his family, and he earned little money. In fact, my mother earned more as an engineer.
When White met him, Demikov was a shadow of his former self. Both had broken new ground in the study of transplants, but White was appalled at how little recognition Demikov had received.
I think Professor Demikov has been passed over too rapidly and has not been given the credit that he deserves in the entire field of transplantation. Here was a man that was totally unknown for all practical purposes. American scientists didn't even know his name. Even in the transplant situation, Professor Demikov didn't count. And I couldn't understand why his work wasn't continued in terms of support.
Demikov couldn't change his fate, but White's visit to the Soviet Union had given him valuable clues for how to take his own research forward. And perhaps he'd found the solution to proving thought processes in a transplanted brain.
And I asked myself, how can I prove that the brain, when transferred or transplanted, is alive, thinks, is conscious? How could I do that?
White had learned of Soviet experiments like this, when a dog's head, separated from its body, still shows signs of consciousness.
The isolated head even reacts to light and to sound.
Perhaps then, White could apply this concept to his own work. Traveling home, he considered his options. If he transplanted a whole head with the brain intact inside it, then it would be obvious if it was conscious or not. It would be another surgical first for the Americans and a scientific achievement worthy of the world's recognition, if he could do it.
I went back to the drawing board and I designed an operation where I would take two monkeys, an A monkey and a B monkey. The B monkey's head would be removed and the A monkey's head would be transferred to the B body.
It took quite 3 years to plan his operation. He would be breaking new ground. And he knew that to some, the surgery would be morally offensive.